Much, Sherry. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Atlantic Council on International Relations webinar on human trafficking, a view from Georgia on an international challenge. As you know, human trafficking is a form of modern day slavery. It is a worldwide problem and a terrible stain on humanity. It is not a new phenomenon. However, modern advances in transportation and communication have made it increasingly profitable and pervasive. Today, we will hear a panel discuss this scourge, its nature, the toll it takes, what is being done to address this terrible problem, and perhaps we will gain some insights into what we can do to help. So I am delighted to see how many people have joined us today. This is perhaps the largest webinar I've ever participated in. We have, I think, over 160 people who have signed up to attend. Of course, I would like to thank our co-hosts, Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport, and the International Women's Think Tank. Without their help and that of Bill Bozarth, who pulled this all together, this program would not have been possible. If this is your first time to engage in an ACIR program, you are thoroughly welcome. The Atlantic Council on International Relations is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that promotes understanding through the free exchange of ideas on the complex problems that confront the United States and the other nations in the world today. You can visit our website at www.atlantacir for details on upcoming events, recent newsworthy articles by our consul generals, as well as membership opportunities and benefits. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you visit our website, you will note some of our upcoming programs. Tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 11:15, we are co-hosting with the Georgia Tech Schuler School College of Business a webinar on India-China border conflict. On December 8th, ACIR members will have an opportunity to hear and interact with James Story in a special exclusive. James Story is the Charge d'Affaires for our Venezuelan Affairs Unit, which is located in the United States Embassy in Bogota, Colombia. I hope you can join us. Also, a very big welcome to members of our diplomatic community who have joined us today. Alphabetically by country, David Cutting, Honorary Consul General of Barbados, Michael Saroulis from the Belgian Consulate, Laura Kudavan, Monica Lantai, and Stephanie Richardson from the Canadian Consulate, Anat Sultan Dadon, Consul General of Israel, Wasim Hogel, Consulate of Lebanon, Vince Farley, Honorary Consul General of Mali, and last but not least, Ray Donato, Honorary Consul General of the Philippines. I sure hope I didn't miss anybody. Again, we hope that each and every one of you, your family and friends are healthy and well and safe from this COVID pandemic. Today, it is our special pleasure to welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Sharon Cooper, Tracy Gilbert, and Vic Reynolds. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brenda Morant, President of the Women's International Think Tank, and our own Bill Bozarth, who will introduce our speakers. Bill, I think you're on first.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kennedy. Our first panelist this morning will be Vic Reynolds, the Director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. We've had a last-minute adjustment here. We had planned to have all three speakers complete and then participate in the Q&A session. Unfortunately, Director Reynolds has been called by a higher authority to leave the discussion this morning before it's complete. So we're going to let him go first. And as he's speaking, if you have questions directed specifically at him, go ahead and begin to post them in the Q&A, and we'll do a special short Q&A with him after he completes his remarks. A little bit about his background. He served 2 terms as the District Attorney of Cobb County, Georgia. He is also a former Chief Magistrate Judge of Cobb County, and he spent a number of years in private practice. He was appointed by the governor to his GBI post in February of this year. And in this capacity, he directs an agency of over 900 employees who provide a number of duties critical the law enforcement in the state. As it pertains to this event, Mr. Reynolds is also the co-chair of the Grace Commission, which was created to combat the threat of human trafficking in Georgia. The Grace Commission is composed of public officials, law enforcement, nonprofits, companies, faith-based institutions, and subject matter experts to tackle human trafficking, seek justice for victims, and hold the bad actors accountable. Director Reynolds, it is an honor to have you with us today, and the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Bill. And again, let me reiterate my apologies to the participants today. I've been called over to the Capitol and need to get over there a little afternoon. So I'm so sorry for running out on you today. But again, thank you for having me here. I'm extremely honored. Bill, thank you for the invitation. And thank you to the participants today for your interest in this very, very important topic. As Dr. Kennedy said a moment ago, we're literally talking about a version of modern day slavery and what we see in the human trafficking arena. And so thank you so much for taking time out of what I know is very busy schedules for each and every one of you, and for being here and willingness to learn about this subject matter and willing to work with us side by side in order that we can stop this scourge. And that's what we intend on doing here at the GBI. I'll give you a little bit of a history. I was actually appointed as director in February of 19. So we're coming up on 2 years as the director of this bureau. It's just a great agency. I'm very honored, very humbled to be here. But at that appointment process with Governor Kemp, we had a long discussion, several discussions about what he envisioned, the changes that he wanted to make in the criminal justice system, and his desire as the governor and through his administration, and what our action areas would be. And two of the areas that this governor and the First Lady and the family were very adamant about is number one, for us to be aggressive and assertive in going after criminal street gangs, which were creating havoc around the state, along with being aggressive and assertive in ending the scourge of human trafficking. And I'll speak about it in a moment, but ironically, those are intertwined in a number of cases that we see, both criminal street gangs and human trafficking. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that happens in a moment. But at the Bureau, we basically have a three-pronged approach to the issue of human trafficking. As Bill touched on a moment ago, the first prong is my position as co-chair of the Grace Commission. One of the things that Governor Kemp did when, right after taking office, is through the power of executive order, he created this Grace Commission. And what that is, it's an acronym, and it stands for Georgians for Refuge, Action, Compassion, and Education. And I'm very honored, very humbled to co-chair that with the First Lady, Marty Kemp, who has made this issue of human trafficking her number one agenda item to work on and resolve during her time as First Lady. And so she and I, along with the Speaker Pro Tem, Jan Jones, we sit as the three co-chairs of this outstanding committee. And as Bill told you a moment ago, what we did in this committee is we began drawing in individuals and representatives from virtually every walk of life that would have some effect, some involvement, some reason to be combating the issue of human trafficking. We reached out first to public officials, elected officials who have the ability to appropriate funds, who have the ability to draft legislation, to steer policy in a certain direction. So we certainly wanted the representation from that group of individuals. We also reached out to our partners in law enforcement. One of the things that we pride ourselves here on at the Bureau is our ability to work not only with local departments, but with other state agencies and federal agencies as well. So we wanted to bring those individuals into that circle of this Grace Commission and to get their input on what we could do better around the state as far as law enforcement and prosecution of these cases was concerned. There was also a push there, and I know some of your other panelists will probably touch on this, for the law enforcement mentality to begin treating the victims of human trafficking as just that, victims, not defendants. Previously, a number of years ago, you would frequently see, and don't get me wrong when I use the gender female, because most of our victims are female, but not all of them are. And so when we would see these victims, we would frequently see them end up in a courtroom or a court of law charged with an offense, generally prostitution. And so we began realizing and wanting to teach our law enforcement partners through the Grace Commission that more likely than not, in the majority of times, these individuals are in fact victims, and we need to begin treating them as that. That's one of the aspects of the Grace Commission, is to educate individuals about that. We also brought in both for-profit and nonprofit corporate folks, so could make sure that we had those areas covered. We brought in our faith-based partners as well. And of course, we wanted to make sure that the Grace Commission was represented by subject matter experts too, folks who knew about human trafficking, who could teach other individuals about that. And we've had a number of meetings around the state. They're open to the public. We just finished our most recent one on October 22nd. We were honored to host it here at the Bureau at headquarters. And so I would encourage each of you, if you have a desire to learn more about what the Grace Commission does, is to watch for those. You can go online. Grace Commission has its own website, and we'll post when the future dates are. We generally try to meet 4 times a year each quarter, and so it's welcome and open to the public and to the media. And the goals of that Grace Commission, besides what I mentioned a moment ago, the primary goal of this Grace Commission, number one, is to tackle and stop human trafficking. And so we want to use this commission as leverage and tool to ultimately get to that goal of ending human trafficking, ending this modern day slavery, particularly here in our state of Georgia. We also wanted to use the Grace Commission as the tool and the leverage to seek justice for victims of human trafficking. Those individuals who are caught into this horrible circle and vortex of violence and literally the forcing of the selling of your body. And so we wanted to make sure we sought justice for any victim in that. And obviously we want to hold the bad actors accountable. If you're committing the act of human trafficking, we want to make sure that we go after you, that we pursue you, and we demand that a court of law hold you accountable and the judges sentence you appropriately. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. A couple of things that we've accomplished in the first year or so of the Grace Commission is we wanted to make sure that people knew what to look for when this idea or this human trafficking issue occurred. In other words, if you saw somebody that perhaps may be a victim or somebody with a trafficker, what certain signs there are to look for. And so what we did is we began formulating with the Department of Administrative Services in Georgia a training program for every employee in the state of Georgia. And we have a lot. I think it's close to 80,000. And so all of those individuals have now been ran through this program that the Grace Commission in partnership with DOAS formed. And so all of the state folks know what to look for and if they see something, what to do in regards to the human trafficking issue. We also developed a new hotline number for Georgia. And I think Sherry will probably put that up as we go through the program. But if not, it's a program, it's a telephone number 1-866-END-HTGA, END, HT Human Trafficking GA Georgia, END HTGA. And the great thing about this particular number is that it will push you or direct you to where you need to go. If it's a victim, we have access to providers for those victims. If it's law enforcement, we can direct you to an agency that you need to be directed to. And just reporting it, we have a 24/7 watch desk here at the GBI that those numbers will come into and those tips will come into, so we can make sure we funnel it out to the correct law enforcement agency around the state. So those are two of the things the Grace Commission has accomplished in its infancy, and we hope to accomplish many more things. But that's the first leg of this 3-pronged attack that the GBI is doing in combating human trafficking, and that's working through the Grace Commission. The second prong of this attack focuses more on what we do here at the Bureau, what you would think of when you think of the GBI, and that's a statewide law enforcement agency that goes about investigating criminal activity and arresting those individuals who perpetrate those crimes in the state. We just, this past summer in July, got off of the ground for the first time an actual human trafficking unit in our state. As most of you any of you who've been around law enforcement or military, we won't hesitate to have an acronym for virtually everything. And so we developed an acronym for our HEAT, H-E-A-T unit, Human Exploitation and Trafficking Unit. And we handpicked agents to go into this unit, and they were charged with doing a couple of things. One, wanted to make sure that they worked very hard to curb and stop commercial sex trafficking in the state of Georgia. That was their first charge. Their second charge was also to begin working labor trafficking cases. Ironically, that's an unplowed field in this state. There hasn't been that aggressive an approach to working labor trafficking cases. And so we're beginning to do that in Georgia. And what we've also learned over the years is that very frequently, both sex trafficking and labor trafficking are connected together. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't letting anything slide under our radar, and that we were watching both of those type of cases. And so our agents are now working both commercial sex trafficking and labor trafficking all around the state of Georgia. We anticipate, without speaking too much out of turn, we anticipate probably making some announcements, maybe even before Thanksgiving, about some cases that we're working on that we'll be seeing come to fruition as some of the first cases that the HEAT unit is working. We also work very closely with the Attorney General's office. They have just developed a relatively new unit there as well for the prosecution purposes. We investigate, GBI investigates, GBI arrest, but ultimately there has to be a prosecutor in a courtroom, what I did for a number of years in pushing that case across the goal line. And so in my partnership with Chris Carr, our Attorney General, one of the things that we suggested, and one of the things that they really thought was a good idea, is to develop this unit within his office that prosecutes these trafficking cases. And so we work very closely with them, have a great relationship. We're very excited to do that. And so that's the second prong of the way we attack the trafficking cases in Georgia. The third prong is through an existing unit, what we refer to acronym-wise as our CAC unit. That's Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes. That's a very busy unit within the GBI. It's one of our largest units. And what they do is they focus initially on child pornography cases. And the reason they do that is because obviously those are egregious cases, and some of the volume of cases that we deal with, I'm talking thousands, tens of thousands of images that individuals will have. But we've also learned too that more often than not, a number of those victims in child pornography are the victims that we'll see down the road in human trafficking. And so we wanted to make sure we were curbing something on the front end to try our best to save those individuals from ever becoming victims of human trafficking later on. One of the second things that tasks that this CAC unit does, besides working these child pornography cases, is they work child trafficking cases as well. Very frequently, when we begin an investigation into child pornography that leads us to execute search warrants in individuals' homes, places of business, things of that nature, it's not unusual for us to run into and develop child trafficking cases based on what those individuals are doing to the victims and with the victims. And so we see that very frequently. So we want to make sure that we're doing what we can do to stop that at the very beginning with our children. And that's what our CAC unit is tasked with. To give you an example of the volume of cases they do, most of our tips come from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We call that NCMEC. NCMEC sends to various states tips that they receive, downloads that they may intercept on the internet, and say, hey, Georgia, this child pornography that we know of has just been downloaded in Chatham County, Georgia. And that will come to us. It will come to the GBI. And our job is to filter through every single one of those tips. In an average year, if you go back in the GBI history and look the last 5 to 7 years, we'll average somewhere right around or a little above 7,000 tips annually from NCMEC. This year in 2020, we're extrapolating that out to be a little over 10,000 tips that we'll ultimately receive from NCMEC just in Georgia alone. And so every one of those tips we go through, we have what we call DFIs, or digital forensic investigators, that go through every single tip for us to make some determination of whether or not it's child pornography and whether or not it's a case that we can work in the state of Georgia. We then do one of two things. We then refer it out to Chatham County, say, you guys work it. We generally have a relationship with them. We may go help them, or we may work the case ourselves. If it's a smaller jurisdiction that doesn't have the ability to do that, then the GBI will work it. But needless to say, it's extremely, extremely busy. And through those cases, through those NICMIC tips, a number of child trafficking cases will develop. And so that allows us to get involved as a statewide agency where we have the ability to work across county lines and work those child trafficking cases in a strong fashion, tie them down hard so they can be prosecuted in a court of law. One of the things I mentioned a moment ago is when I was talking about some of the things the governor wanted to see accomplished is this work against criminal street gangs. I will tell you that we're constantly seeing human trafficking cases where the traffickers are in fact members of criminal street gangs. When I was the district attorney in Cobb County, we prosecuted a number of cases there where we were seeing opposing gangs working together for the purposes of trafficking young girls up in Cobb County. And we prosecuted a number of those cases, and we're making a number of those cases here at the Bureau. So I do want you to know that sometimes, particularly if you hear us speak or talk, that we'll frequently be intertwining both our fight against criminal street gangs and the fight against human trafficking, because they're very frequently connected to each other. So that's a little bit about what we do here and kind of our three-pronged approach. As I said a moment ago, I have been summoned down to the Capitol in a little bit, so I apologize for having to scoot out with you. But Bill, I'd be more than happy to address any questions that we have at this point, taking a little bit out of order, and I apologize for that. But if you have anything you want to ask me, then I'd be honored to address those in the time I have left. And thank you so much for today. I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you so much, Director Reynolds. The format we're going to go to now is our question and answer specialist. Tony Pizzuccoli will take over, and he will field any questions that have come in that are in particular directed to Director Reynolds. So Tony, take it away.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Bill Bozart and Brenda Morin, many thanks for the long hours and hard work putting this event together. We thank you so much. And members of the esteemed panel, welcome. Director Reynolds, thank you so much for your presentation. We understand you have to leave early. And we do have some questions that are germane to your comments. Given the immense growth of migration globally due to unrest, food insecurity, and climate change, how does your office prepare for this issue here? And are policies being developed to safeguard the victims, often linked to crimes themselves? In other words, theft, prostitution, and so on.
Yeah, it's a good question. I will tell you that, you know, one of the things I learned as a district attorney is that the issue of immigration is very difficult to serve that issue on a local or state level. That's a federal issue. And so our friends with the Border Patrol, with Homeland Security, with folks that we do work with on occasion are certainly involved in working with that particular issue. But one of the things that I mentioned a moment ago and what I want to emphasize is this push from law enforcement to educate and to understand that these individuals who are involved in these trafficking rings are victims of circumstances beyond their power and control at a certain point of their life, and they're not defendants. In speaking in full disclosure, I will tell you that a lot of times these individuals, it's difficult to make trafficking cases because the victims have been ingrained in a lifestyle so long and been basically browbeat to the point where they're very afraid of law enforcement. They won't be candid with law enforcement. They're difficult. It's difficult for them to speak to us in an open way, an honest way, a way that helps us make the cases. But we realize that. Our agents know that. They work through that. We do everything we can to develop partnerships with our nonprofits. We have a very close working relationship with groups like Wellspring and folks like that, where we try our best to put victims where they need to be to get these help and not treat them like the defendants. So I think we're doing better in that regard, Tony. I think we can always learn and get better and make sure victims are treated as victims and not defendants. And I would be foolish to say it doesn't still occur, but I'm comfortable telling you that we're much, much better than we were years ago.
We have a participant who has a comment that he would like to make, and then I have a quick question for you.
Certainly.
It's very gratifying to see that this subject is being given the attention it deserves on multiple fronts. I'm on the advisory board for an Atlanta-based company which is trying to raise funding for a feature film to focus more attention on this egregious crime. The question, tell us more about what went into the planning of the June raid in Georgia that rescued victims. Does the GBI look to go after traffickers even without the target being national in scope as this one was?
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, one of the good things about the GBI is that we're focused primarily on what happens here in our state. We're a state agency with the authority to go from county to county. When I was the Cobb District Attorney, for example, my focus had to be on what happened inside the boundaries of Cobb County. And what happens in human trafficking cases is that, let's say that somebody sets up an individual that they're trafficking in Cobb County. Police respond to that or begin an investigation. Within 2 or 3 days, they may have moved to Clayton County. Another 2 or 3 days later to DeKalb or over to Barrow County. And so what the Bureau, what we can do as a statewide agency is we have the ability to cross those county lines without any jurisdictional issue. And so that's really one of the reasons why I wanted to make sure, the governor wanted to make sure that the GBI was working these cases. In reference to the first part of the question, we were very honored to be asked to be a partner with the United States Marshal Services in an operation they ran this past summer where a number of children and trafficking victims were in fact rescued, and a number of them were placed into our partnerships that provide care and services for these children and for these young folks. And we were very honored to do that. We always are willing to partner with our federal partners of the Marshals or the FBI. In fact, we're part of the FBI Match Task Force at the GBI. But the thing I'm really impressed about and really excited about is this heat unit. What I envision it happening as we grow this heat unit is not only having GBI agents on it, but local officers as well. What we call TFOs are officers who are assigned to statewide task force officers. And I envision in the future when that heat unit grows is having the locals embedded in there with us, so we can work those cases both on a local and a statewide basis and focus on what's happening here within our state. Never closing the door on our partnerships with the federals, but also primarily concentrating on what happens within the boundaries of this state.
Director Reynolds, we're coming up to a moment when we're going to have to switch to some of the other panel members. However, there is a very important question being asked by one of the consuls general, and it might be a good way for you to be ending up your appearance here. And I will thank you very quickly, personally, for your having agreed to come on this panel. It's appreciated. We wish you and your family COVID-free and a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Question, sir. Is there training for consulate staff and staff at visa application centers to make sure they can identify cases and victims of trafficking? And do you know of any cases of trafficking in which foreign consulates in Atlanta have been confronted?
You know what, that's a tremendous question. And I don't know of any cases of that nature in my time as a Bureau Director. However, what I will do is I will reach out to some of my federal partners of Homeland Security who we work a number of trafficking cases with. I think that would be an excellent place to have some training done, because obviously they may see things that on a state level we're not seeing. And I appreciate the idea and the planting of the seed from whomever that came from, and I'll make sure unequivocally that I'll follow up on it and see what we can get done about it.
Thank you, sir. Godspeed. keep the heat on those bad guys. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Apologies again for running out, but thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Director Reynolds. Thank you, Tony. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Brenda Moran, who's going to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Sharon Cooper. So take it away, Brenda.
Thank you, Bill. Sharon Cooper is the CEO of Development and Forensic Pediatrics, PA, a consulting firm that provides research, training, and expert witness testimony in cases of child maltreatment. Dr. Cooper serves on the boards of several national and international organizations focused on violence against children. She has lectured both nationally and internationally in well over 30 conferences on the subject and has provided extensive training regarding sexual exploitation to representatives of more than 45 countries. Dr. Cooper has worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, providing victim-centered training for more than a decade, and presently serves on the board of directors. Dr. Cooper, welcome.
Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here. And let me start by just sharing my screen as we begin a conversation on this particular topic.
Human trafficking is a crime that takes away souls, to take away memories. My trafficker was someone who knew my family. I was given specific instructions. You're going to do what I ask you to do. If you know, your mom and your 3 brothers in Honduras are going to die. So I allowed one crime to happen, so another crime wouldn't. A neighbor reported that so many people were coming in and out of the house, and that's how I was rescued. Most people didn't understand what was I going through.
Boys are traditionally under-recognized and underserved. They don't have specific residential treatment homes where they can go. They may go to shelters, but they don't have the same services that girls do. And I think across the country, more and more, there's an awareness that this absolutely has to be addressed.
I was kicked out of my parents' home because of my sexual orientation. And in a lot of ways, it really conditioned me for being very vulnerable.
It took a long time for us to understand that actually these were exploited youth, typically very vulnerable youth who have been in foster care or homeless or runaway youth. And once we began to understand how easily they could be groomed and recruited by offenders, we then began to recognize that these were children who were being exploited.
Children who have been trafficked, both for actually sex and labor trafficking, are more vulnerable for a variety of reasons. Obviously, their age, their developmental capacity, they're more easily manipulated, and traffickers know that.
I was born in Ecuador. When I was 16, my stepsisters told my dad that it would be a good idea if I will come here. They say she could help with one baby while I work, and then she will go to school in the afternoon. I never ended up going to school. I was home 24 hours with the baby, and then little by little, she started telling me to cook, to clean. I wasn't getting paid. I was monitored everything that I did. I felt trapped without no exit. And it made me feel that they were doing something great by giving me food and giving me a place to be. And the way that I had to pay them back is doing everything for them.
There are professionals that are already working in the field with trafficking victims. Child welfare agencies, child protection workers, juvenile justice professionals, including attorneys, judges, guardian ad litems, court-appointed special attorneys, case managers, social workers, or foster care systems, school counselors. Some victims of trafficking are going to school. In fact, their traffickers pick them up at the end of the day.
Any young person is vulnerable. And one of the biggest predictive variables is a young person who has been sexually abused.
Child sexual abuse, human trafficking, most people, think of them as separate, and I think there's much more overlap.
Before we talk about the reason that you're here today, I want to tell you a couple of things.
We need to have a well-coordinated response that cares for the well-being of the child. At child advocacy centers, we always are looking at to the possibility that other things may have occurred. The civic purpose of the forensic interview is to gather as much factual information from the child's perspective, and it's part of a broader multidisciplinary team related to the investigation. Children who were in our treatment program last year on average had 8.5 different victimizations. Not until we really find out what the child has experienced can we truly provide them help.
There are many challenges in serving this population. People don't understand the complex nature of this victimization.
To describe the relationship between a trafficker and a victim is a domestic violence situation. There's this connection to the abuser.
In many cases, children will return to the trafficker and they're not ready to get out of the life at that point, and it may be months before they are, years even. But if we can establish some trust with the child, maybe that'll make them open up next time and bring them a little bit closer to making the decision to leave.
The types of services that these victims need, of course, are trauma-informed, are comprehensive. They need time and therapy to understand their victimization.
Making sure we connect them with a safe place to live, but also a quality of treatment, therapy is absolutely critical for their viability in the long term.
One of the challenges for them is integrating back into a school system and accessing often specialized services to make sure that their needs are being addressed, particularly with large gaps in schooling. For foreign national children, there are clearly language barriers, so they would need English as second language classes in addition to mainstream education. There may be guardianship issues, so these children are navigating many different systems and different legal processes.
Finding ways that young people can engage with communities where they can learn new skills is important, and re-engaging them with their communities of origin. Native American, the African American, and faith-based community is just tremendous in terms of helping us support our young people moving forward.
Once I found the power of my story, I decided to become an advocate. I have shared my story as a way that people be inspired to make change, as a way of people become advocates, just like my casa for me. Marcos, my court-appointed special advocate. He came into my life 2 days before my 18th birthday.
His spirit just wasn't there. You could see in his eyes. And my first instinct was to try to cheer this kid up.
He spoke Spanish. He really came into my life and really helped me. If it wasn't for his help and support, I wouldn't be the advocate I am today.
We don't have evidence-based practices for the field of trafficking yet, but we need to borrow from other fields that have seen success. It's working with those providers to understand what some of those unique and specialized needs of a trafficked youth might be within their existing successful system.
And we have to remember that it is the individual child's journey.
From years, it's a success, and having gone through everything he went through and him being the person he is now, I'm just glad that he's able to help others.
So I really want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to be in this particular venue today. I know that the Atlanta Council on International Relations and the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport is working tirelessly to be able to make this a functional and pragmatic presentation. And I'm glad to be part of that process. Let's see if I'm in where I should be. Let me just begin by saying that Georgia has really done some tremendous things because of the fact of its new law, its law, Rachel's Law. It was founded, as you know, and really is an honor because it's the first state to have the first safe harbor law to be named after a youth sex trafficking survivor. And a state that understands that a constitutional amendment was necessary in order to put teeth into a law such as this, that would ultimately provide funding, a funding mechanism for the child victims of sex trafficking. This constitutional amendment also created a commission so that the funds would be allocated specifically for services for child survivors. And it also has ensured that those convicted of trafficking of children would become mandated registered sex offenders. And so I truly honor your state for this visionary action, so necessary to protect children in America. And I hope many other states will do the same. So as the Office of Victims of Crime video depicted, no one size fits all when we're considering the many faces of human trafficking. This year is the 20th anniversary of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and we've come a long way in understanding the complexity of this particular form of human slavery. Labor trafficking was spoken about in this particular video when this young girl was brought in as an au pair, but then was never paid and had to end up doing much more than just be a babysitter. Sex trafficking of adults was mentioned by the director previously, sometimes referred to in federal courts as forced prostitution, still a well-recognized form of human trafficking. The commercial sexual exploitation of children is the one that many of us are focused on quite a bit, because if you become a trafficking victim early in your life, it changes the trajectory of your life forever. This term, the commercial sexual exploitation of children, or CSEC, was given to us by Dr. Richard Estes from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work. That term, CSEC, became an international term. And to date, there have been 3 world congresses specifically focused on the commercial sexual exploitation of children. The United Nations has a special rapporteur specifically for this particular form of victimization. And we have to continue to look and make sure we stay abreast of the changes as victimization evolves. But in addition to the commercial sexual exploitation of children, there's also trafficking in organs for illegal transplants, with kidneys, hearts, and eyes as the most common trafficked organs around the world. And then finally, when we're speaking of trafficking, we don't want to forget the trafficking of children as child soldiers in war-torn areas around the world. These children are highly endangered when they are brought into an organization in order to support soldiers. So gone are the days of the known parts of time where trafficking is assumed to be the only game in town. The advent and use of what is referred to as information and communication technology, or ICT, has made human trafficking even more so the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is today. I applaud the Atlanta Council on International Relations for its recognition that hubs of transportation continue to be a major vector for this form of victimization. And it's really important to know that human trafficking is recognized as a public health crisis. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has also played an important role for our understanding the role of trafficking as the end game when a child goes missing. Back in 1984, the National Association of Police wrote a book called Preventing Missing Children. It was one of the first books I ever read in that particular area. And as a pediatrician, I recognized that they were talking about how children who run away or who are thrown away or who are abandoned end up in a hub of transportation like a bus station or some other location. And a recruiter comes to that location and befriends that child, who usually is at the end of their rope, having not been able to think beyond just getting away from wherever they were. That recruiter person often works for the trafficker, befriends this girl or boy, and tells them that they have a safe place for them to stay, and they should not be afraid to come with them because they're almost of the same age. That takes them into a den of iniquity, if you will, that is so terrible that it can change the trajectory of their lives. After I had read that book, I thought that as a pediatrician, we needed to be a lot more knowledgeable about what can happen to runaway children. And that wasn't even the beginning of understanding the whole role of sexual exploitation. In 2003, 3G technology came out in Japan for the first time in the world, and it changed the face of how children were trafficked. ECPAC International reported from Japan that year, when 3G technology came out, which allows you to take a picture of somebody and transfer it to somebody else's cell phone without ever using a computer, without ever having a child standing on a street corner, without ever having any visible evidence of what's going to be a tremendously horrible victimization of a child. That year, the incidence of the trafficking of children in Japan increased 95%. The terminology in Japan at that time was compensated dating of children. We wouldn't call that as sex trafficking. That was a wake-up call for us in 2003. Now, information and communication technology, or ICT, is almost always part of the victimization of sex trafficking. Online grooming begins that process with many presentations. A boy in a high school who starts to befriend a girl who isn't so popular, or who might be really bookish and doesn't have a lot of friends. Someone who meets a minor in a video game and becomes their friend for all the time when it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. The use of internet and communication technology in social media, bringing a child in to meet a friend of a friend, through the use of apps so easily purchased in the App Store, by blackmail facilitated by implanted spyware of a teenage girl or boy, leading to a situation that we now refer to as sextortion. Blackmail and threats to family members after what was thought to be just an innocuous sexting message between a juvenile who has made a self-generated image, sent it to someone that they think wants to have a romantic relationship with them, and then become blackmailed to have to leave their home and ultimately become a trafficking victim. Blackmail is a result of digital images obtained through a drug or alcohol facilitated sexual assault. That's another really terrible life-changing existence, and has been the source of ongoing trafficking victimization in some well-known victims. The befriending of a person in a drug, alcohol, or partner violence counseling session, and once they have befriended that individual, begin to have an ICT relationship that can result in sex trafficking victimization. The exploitation by a faith leader involving digital images, emails, and other electronic means of selling a minor to friends or acquaintances. This is what contributes tremendously to what in the literature is referred to as spiritual wounding, when you have a trafficker who has some type of faith connection. Grooming through a dating site by email, or what seems to be just a simple text message. And then, of course, being marketed via an online classified site, such as Backpage.com. Now that we are in the COVID-19 pandemic, trafficking is becoming even more of a major concern. What we know from research from Mexico, which was written about and published in our first textbook on child sexual exploitation, is that when the community level of poverty rises above a certain percentage, people will begin to sell children, because that's a commodity, unlike drugs, that you can use over and over again. According to Dr. Maria Azaola in Mexico, who did this Northern Hemisphere research in conjunction with Dr. Richard Estes, she found that if the prevalence of poverty was 40% or higher, then people would begin to start considering selling their children. Now we are seeing so many financial stresses, job losses, and panic associated with the COVID virus. Family members who are being sold to landlords for rent. That's already being written about in the newspapers. Organizations and hotlines such as the RAIN network. RAIN stands for Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, which is a hotline for individuals to call in, is reporting now that over this year of the COVID pandemic, they are at an all-time high, more reports than the entire 26 years of their existence for rape, abuse, and incest And more than half of the callers, for the first time in the history of this organization, more than half of the callers are minors. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children also has reported a 106% increase in reports of child sexual exploitation this year. Abusive images, as we had heard about before, we used to refer to those as child pornography, but now we recognize that it isn't voluntary modeling and it doesn't entail consent. So therefore, these images are images of sexual abuse. So we frequently refer to this as child sexual abuse material. These images on the internet may often entail a form of trafficking, either by the production of those images, as can be seen when you have pay-for-view individuals who are looking at video clips and demanding certain sex acts, or just by the very distribution of these abusive images, or CSAM. In closing, when we talk about the whole issue of sex trafficking, particularly sex trafficking of children, I hope that you will understand how we have to remain abreast of technology and communication, and know that even though there may be not so visible selling of children and adults on street corners as we used to see in what I would refer to as the olden days, the impact is significantly real. And we want to stay abreast of being aware of how to best protect children in this time and date. I would like to make sure that you are aware of the National Hotline for Human Trafficking in the United States, often referred to as the Polaris Project. And its telephone number is 1-888-373-7888. Or one can text it with 233-733 and simply write the word help. This is a multi-language hotline for anyone, so that we can make sure that people will be safe. I sincerely want to thank you and remind you as well about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's hotline, 1-800-THE-LOST, which is, I'm going to show to you now on the screen so that we make sure that we have that right here, those two telephone numbers. And if you have any questions or anything of that nature, please feel free to bring that into our discussion at this particular time. Thank you so much for your attention. And I hope that these types of community engagements will continue. Good job, Atlanta. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Dr. Cooper. We're going to introduce our next speaker and have her presentation. And at the conclusion of that, we will entertain questions for both of the two panelists. Our next speaker is going to be Ms. Tracy Gilbert. Tracy is Hartsfield-Jackson's Airport Community Affairs Manager in the Office of Public Affairs Division. She leads their community outreach efforts, including the Human Trafficking Campaign, which is aimed at increasing public awareness in the movement of exploited children through the world's busiest airport. Having worked for the Marriott Corporation earlier in her career, she joined Hartsfield-Jackson in 2004. She served as the events special programs manager, supporting the Intergovernmental Affairs Business Unit. In this role, Tracy has managed Hartsfield-Jackson's Partners in Education program, which is an outreach relative with local school and community groups, as well as special events. Ms. Gilbert is a Georgia native, having received her undergraduate degree in mass communications and public relations from Fort Valley State University. Ms. Gilbert, thank you very much for being with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bill. Again, it's my pleasure and honor to be here this morning to represent Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, General Manager John Selden, Airport Director of the Office of Public Affairs, Myrna White. It is my esteemed honor to be here to talk about ATL's strong stand against human trafficking. If you'll allow me to share my screen, I'll share a few pieces of information about what we're doing to make a statement about ending human trafficking. So a lot of people are asking the question, what is human trafficking? What does it look like? Why is it so hard to detect, yet it's plaguing our communities? Human trafficking is the trade of humans, most commonly for the purposes of forced labor, sexual or commercial exploitation. And it's happening right here up under our noses in our communities, in our shopping malls, at our schools, and just at our communities at large. And ATL is saying not on our watch will this type of foolishness take place in our airport. Let's talk a little bit about trafficking by the numbers. It is estimated that about 20,000 victims are trafficked in the US a year. In 2016, the airport was mandated by the state to create an awareness campaign whereby we decided to hang banners, create public service announcements as a way to create awareness among the traveling public of how to end or help end human trafficking. This is done on a 365-day basis. It's not a monthly campaign or something we do on and off. It's 365 at our airport. And according to further research, we've learned that nearly 2.8 million runaways are victims and at risk of sexual exploitation. Our call to action is simple. Help us save our youth. Do your part to help end human trafficking. Now, there are a lot of myths out there, and one of those is that the airport is a hub for human trafficking. Well, I'll have you to know that the airport has such strict compliances regarding our safety measures, it's extremely difficult for perpetrators to come into our space to conduct these types of activities. If you're traveling internationally, you have to be vetted by the Custom Border and Protection Agency in order to get into Atlanta. If you're traveling here domestically, there's TSA that's vetting you at the checkpoints. If you're coming into the airport for travel or to conduct business, there's several measures of security compliance that you must adhere to in order to maneuver and go about business at our airport. And so some of the myths that are out there, human trafficking and human smuggling are the same. Well, trafficking is the recruiting and transporting and harboring or receiving of a person through force or to exploit him or her. And human smuggling is the transporting an individual from one destination to another. Myth, human trafficking always means prostitution. Well, the reality is human trafficking can also include forced labor, and as Dr. Cooper mentioned, even organ trade. You see, that old myth of, human trafficking being like prostitution, that is just not the case. Our children are being taken advantage of. Their vulnerability, their whole sense of being is being manipulated and misused. And we have to do more to help end this public health crisis. Now I'd like to talk to you about the many, many activities and outreach efforts that ATL is doing to help end human trafficking. As a major transportation hub, we decided after City Council, Atlanta City Council created an ordinance to do more training. We decided to take an approach of making sure that every agency and operation and our frontline employees receive training. So through our guest relations department, we make sure that within the first 90 days of your employment, that you are actually signed up to receive training. Teaches you information about how to look for signs of human trafficking, what steps to take if you encounter someone who's actually being trafficked. And if it just looks suspicious, we ask our employees to do something about it. Atlanta and the surrounding regions is one of the largest hubs for human trafficking in the country. So ATL takes this very seriously. And some of the things and the efforts that we do include our youth outreach forums with neighboring school districts. For example, we work closely with a lot of our high schools in making sure that we facilitate youth forums. We have reached over 5,000 students in teaching them about what to look for, their friends, in their communities, some of the things that they can do to report it so that we won't continue to be faced with this issue. We also have public service announcements that are go on a rotational basis. As you make your way into the airport, you will see signage throughout the concourses and the terminals explaining to you that not on our watch, we're not for sale at our airport. And it's important that as you travel through your airport, if you're eating at one of our concessions or shopping in one of our retail stores, if you see something suspicious, we ask that you dial 911 to report it. Here's a case study we'd like to share with you. In 2011, an Alaska Airlines flight attendant noticed something suspicious about a girl who was sitting next to a well-dressed older man. The flight attendant, as you know, their job is to make everyone feel comfortable while in flight. And so when she noticed that this young lady looked a little bit uneased and not happy to be on a trip, she took a stand to make a difference. And she wrote a note and posted it in the ladies' room on the aircraft. And the young lady was able to reach the young girl who asked for help. And as a result of this courageous act, we were able to help save a young lady. Now, as far as what's happening in our airport, we've just had our very first reported incident back in May, where members of the airport chaplaincy, the USO, noticed a young lady sitting out in the atrium, crying and appearing to be very unstable. And we immediately, as airport leaders, took a courageous approach to reach out to this young lady, ask her about why was she upset and what was going on. And come to find out, this young lady was a long way from home. She had been trafficked in a local hotel near the airport. We went about making sure that first of all, that we provided her with the resources she needed of the basics of food, making sure that she was able to get a plane ticket back home. And we also went about assuring her that we were going to do everything as an airport agency to ensure that she would get home safe and sound. And that was, to my knowledge, the only reported incident that we've had at our airport, and that was back in May of this year. ATL continues to take action on a daily basis. As I said earlier, this is 365 days a year. In January, we light up our canopies in a bright color blue to signify National Human Trafficking Awareness Month. We also meet with our working groups that represents every agency within operation to develop campaigns throughout the year. We have a press conference at the beginning of the year with local law enforcement, the Atlanta Consular Corps, law enforcement agents, including the FBI, to talk about ways as a collective community that we can stamp out human trafficking. We hold our annual stakeholder forum. And in 2019, our stakeholder forum included the participation of nearly 1,000 stakeholders throughout the state and the region. We post signage in our restrooms in high traffic areas. If you're traveling through baggage claim, or you're getting ready to take an Uber or Lyft at ground transportation, you will see signage that talks about ways that you can help us end human trafficking. We also want to make it clear to our youth and to the people that we service in the surrounding communities that ATL is taking a strong stand. And that's why we as airport leaders go out through our community affairs division And we host these youth public forums in our high schools. We post signage out. We work with the state superintendent's office by being a part of conferences, speaking about what more we can do to take a collective approach to help end this public safety issue that's devastating our communities. What can you do to help at your company, at your organization, at your civic group? First, secure the buy-in of your stakeholders. Talk about ways that you can come together to create awareness platforms, conducting meetings, getting the word out about what to look for, what signs that depict someone being trafficked. As a community, it's incumbent among all of us to take an appropriate and most important stand to help end human trafficking. If you have any questions about ways that you can develop your own program or more questions about our program here at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, email us at communityaffairs@atl.com. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share this most important information this morning. And if you have any further questions, I'm open to answer questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. At this stage, having heard two back-to-back presentations, and both of those presenters are going to be with us for the balance of our time together, I'd like to turn it over to Tony again to entertain questions that have arisen from both of the past two presentations. So Tony, it's all yours.
Tony, your mic is muted.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Bill. Members of the panel, thank you so much for your fine presentations. We appreciate it. In the short period of time that we have left, we have a number of questions that have begun to gather on our screen relative to your excellent thoughts. Unless a question is directed at a particular speaker, panelist, I'll begin the questions with one particular panelist and then rotate so that all of you have an opportunity to take the question that is coming in. And if other panelists have any thoughts they wish to throw in, by all means, please do so. Our first question is, how can a youth organization like the Boy Scouts of America, with more than 30,000 scouts from ages 5 to 21 and 9,000 plus adult leaders in the Atlanta area, help battle human trafficking? Our scouts are trained in BSA's youth protection and internet safety programs to prevent them from being victimized themselves. Are we exploring working with groups like Tapestry and Street Grace to collect items needed by victims? And are there any other ways that the scouts can assist?
If I could respond to that, that's a really great question. In fact, I am aware of the Boy Scouts of America. I have worked with their security system in years past, talking about internet safety. Some of the things that would be really good is to encourage scouts to seek a badge that is focused on internet safety. I believe that they have a badge like that now. And to have that either as a whole troop project or as an individual project for many of the youth. How those youth can become ambassadors, if you will, would be to take on the descriptor of being an upstander instead of a bystander. And if in fact they see kids that are playing video games in their scope of influence and they're playing with unknown people, start to help them have the script about how important it is not to hang out there with people that you don't know, because you don't know what they may want to do to you. The second thing, as far as scouting is concerned, or other youth serving organizations, is to have at least a couple of times a year a group session where the scouts themselves are the trainers to talk about internet safety and to talk about ICT, information and communication technology victimization. This is really important because youth, frankly, are the natives in technology, and those of us who have been kissed with gray hair are the immigrants. And so we're usually the ones having to ask them to tell us, how do you do this after all? So this is a wonderful opportunity to have parents come in and be listeners to the Scouts as they present to their whole troop or others as an Eagle badge or some other type of community serving dynamic. And then finally, I think that there is tremendous benefit in researching. Help Scouts not just speak from their heads, but help Scouts read about internet safety, about what are some of the emerging threats against children and adults, what are some of the common lures that are there. Many of these kinds of information are available at nonprofit organizations such as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children or the Canadian Center for Child Protection. There are many opportunities there. I'll stop talking by only saying one more thing. You might want to also dialogue and network with your local law enforcement. The Scouts could dialogue and network with their local law enforcement, particularly those individuals who work in the areas of sexual exploitation or internet crimes against children. Those particular trained police officers, sheriff's deputies, SBI, State Bureau of Investigation, and federal individuals have had years of training and are always wanting to be able to positively impact youth, to get right to the point, to help themselves to be safe. So these are some of the things that I would recommend with respect to that question. Thank you so much. That was a great question.
Yes, I'd also like to weigh in on that question as well. One of the things we do through our aviation education program, which is designed to inspire the youth about careers in aviation, is we connect with our local Metro Atlanta school districts. In that effort, we talk real talk as career day speakers, as graduation coaches, as youth motivation coaches. Once we go in and we start to speak about careers in aviation, you would be surprised at what types of conversation bubble up out of that. And as I said earlier, through our youth forums, we connect the schools with the organizations and nonprofit groups like Youth Sparks, Gigi's House, and other organizations that have a focus on this issue that's plaguing our communities. I think it's important that we connect the learning institutions with the nonprofit agencies so that there can be some collaboration around this issue, because many young people don't understand what it looks like. And as Dr. Cooper mentioned, parents are not aware of how something as simple and as fun as TikTok, the application now that we, of course, you heard on 60 Minutes, is devastating and plaguing by making sure that data is being transferred just by the simple understanding your keystroke algorithms. So we have to take a more proactive approach to make it a multilateral awareness with our guardians, parents, school officials, and one-on-one hardcore conversations with our young people.
The next question is, how have we seen things improve since Rachel's Law was enacted by Georgia in 2015? Why did that bill also require a constitutional change? And are other states following suit? Tracy?
I'm sorry, were you directing it to Tracy? Go ahead, Tracy.
No, I had mentioned I would rotate.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with Rachel's Law, but I can tell you that airports across the country are beginning to take a strong stance. We actually received an invitation from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medical Airport Cooperative Research Program, ACRP, to be a part of working groups as airports in the country begin to develop some strict protocols and guidelines about programming at our nation's airport. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Cooper to address your specific question.
Thank you very much. In order to be able to make sure that you are going to have funding available with respect to the individuals who have been offenders in situations involving sexual exploitation, that is a pretty complicated dynamic. There are many law enforcement agencies that go one route, such as forfeiture of materials by traffickers, for example. This usually occurs, in my experience, in federal prosecutions. I've not seen it as frequently in state prosecutions. But because it does entail the transfers of money, the issues of offender registration, the dynamics of having to pay money for the perspective to ultimately to help rehabilitation, it will become necessary that you have a state agency, governing body that would approve that type of very large action. And so it was really excellent that they decided to look at the whole state constitution and make decisions with respect to this issue.
I think based on what Tracy had to say earlier, there is a question that's been aimed at her. Does the airport have any advocates or clinical staff who assists victims at the airport?
We don't have clinical staff that assists victims, but as I said earlier, the first reported case that we learned about back in May, we worked closely with our airport chaplaincy, and they were able to address the victim's issues, get her the support that she needed. And as a collective organization, we worked with our airline partners, the USO, to ensure that this young lady received the support that she needed and an airline ticket to get back home safe and sound. So primarily, we work with the airport chaplaincy to address these issues if there's a need, but we do not have a medical trained organization or facility to help address that, not at this time.
Dr. Cooper says human trafficking victims see themselves as victims of a crime, and does their attitude determine the extent to which they'll accept assistance from various elements of civil society?
I'm sorry, were you asking that as a question? I didn't.
Yeah, yes, that was a question that was aimed at you.
Sure. What we know about survivors of human trafficking, all different types of human trafficking, is that they have to be very careful because the leading cause of death, the three leading causes of death in human trafficking are going to be suicide, homicide, and HIV/AIDS. Those are the three leading causes of death. And suicide has recently become more common than homicide, but homicide 10 years ago was the most common cause of death. So when we recognize the nature of power and control that individuals experience, whether they are sex trafficking victims or labor trafficking victims, we shouldn't expect them to all of a sudden throw off their chains, so to speak, as if they could trust systems that may be there to rescue them. Many times, remember, it was only in 2004 that we began to change our federal statutes so that children who were being sold were seen as victims as compared to juvenile delinquents. Prior to that time, it's the victim who would have been arrested. And that takes a lot of rethinking, even down to the level of our law enforcement at times, because they may not recognize that this petty crime that a minor may have caused may have been a necessary thing that she was told she had to do by the trafficker. And so we really don't want to be judgmental, and we certainly shouldn't expect him or her to tell you everything as soon as they have been rescued, because they often are too afraid to be able to trust systems such as our systems to be able to protect them. It takes relationship building, and it also takes reassurance that you have some understanding of what is happening or has happened to them, and you want to help them. That is going to be a really important dynamic.
The next question is apparently aimed at both of you. It's a hard one.
Okay.
Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Can you foresee a day when this practice is significantly reduced?
You want to start, Tracy?
Yes, Dr. Cooper and then Tracy, whoever would like to jump.
Yeah, I am of the belief that if we stay vigilant, that there will be light at the end of the tunnel. But it takes, and it's going to take, a more concerted effort on all of us. I mean, when you talk about airports, let's think about all transportation hubs, Uber, Lyft, the train stations, making sure that everyone in transportation, supply chain, logistics, freight forwarders, that everyone weighs in on ways that we can create more awareness. And then at the local grassroots level, let's not forget about our PTAs and local school advisory council groups and other civic groups that can actually make a difference by just getting the word out so that people begin to understand it. If we all take more of a collective approach, yes, I do think that we can eradicate this horrible public health issue. Dr. Cooper?
Yes. The research has shown, that children who are at highest risk for sex trafficking victimization have already been abused. They've been victims of abuse and neglect in their lives. And in fact, a significant number of children who are sold were sold by their families before they ever ran away from home. So therefore, if we begin the process of trying to eradicate child maltreatment in general, especially child neglect, followed by child sexual abuse, those are the two most important types of child maltreatment that we see contributing to children running away from home and then becoming at great risk to be caught up by a trafficker. If we can address these particular aspects of child maltreatment, we will definitely make a big difference with respect to the pool of victims. We are seeing the rates of child maltreatment decline, although the COVID pandemic has really put a big, huge bump in the road as far as that's concerned. And we're going to have to really do a lot to try to dig our way back to where we were before the pandemic. But if we can have safe, secure, nurturing homes, which is what the CDC helps us to understand is our goal with respect to eradicating child maltreatment. If we can have appropriate services for substance use and misuse, so that if youth run away from home and are sometimes intentionally given drugs for control and then end up becoming compliant victims because of addiction, if we can look at the role of poverty, especially community poverty, and see how we can intervene, because we know that the higher the poverty level, the more likely children are to be trafficked. These are all dynamics that are a long way away from the street corner. They are dynamics within the fabric of our country. And I can promise you that there are many people looking at all of these different areas because we want to see our children grow and be healthy and be productive. And we don't want to see them become victims. And we don't want to see victim children become victimizers, as has been also researched by the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Law, looking at the past history of traffickers and what happened to them before they ever became traffickers. So these are some of the dynamics that I think, yes, we will see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just that we have to really approach this in a multitude of ways.
Yes, we are fast running up to the end of the program. Unfortunately, we'll have time perhaps for one, maybe two more questions. So I would ask the panelists if you can somewhat abbreviate your answers so we may be able to fit within the time frame that we're working with. Tracy, this question was asked specifically of you, and if you could just limit yourself to a relatively short response, we'd appreciate it. Do you work with partners in other international airports to share information? Can you tell us some success stories, if you can limit it to one, where the airline industry players have worked together to deter or prevent exploitation?
Well, yes, we have very strong strategic partnerships with the airline ambassadors which is a global organization of flight attendants and in-flight crew members that go across the globe teaching and training about how to combat human trafficking. We also participate in webinars and we participate on panels with international dignitaries. As a matter of fact, back in April, we spoke on a webinar with a group of leaders in Dubai, and we spoke about our campaign and some of the things that we do at our airport. And we're constantly, each year, when we prepare for our stakeholder forum, our Atlanta Consular Corps are at the forefront of participating, being speakers, and being a part of our overall campaign throughout the year.
Dr. Cooper, I don't know if it's possible to insert a 1-minute answer to this. Hopefully you can. Could you just tell us quickly something about the treatment after the rescue of a victim? How does that, if you can microencapsulate that?
Certainly. What these survivors need is a safe place to be, treatment for any types of substance use or misuse problems that may have occurred for them, and really trauma-informed, appropriate mental health care, which is usually going to be trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy or may entail other types of therapy. We don't as yet have guidelines from the American Psychological Association, but we know that the most important thing is to be supportive and to start them into a normal lifestyle, which could take up to a year or more in order for trafficking survivors to be able to do well.
Thank you so much. As Director of Programs, I'd like to thank the panel members again. And I now turn the program over to Dr. Kennedy. Happy Thanksgiving all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Wow, was that a terrific set of performances. I want to thank our panelists for their very thoughtful and informative comments. You clearly have collectively made us aware of this scourge that we confront, its pervasiveness, the subtle and sometimes not so subtle means used to entice individuals, and what is being done, if not to eliminate human trafficking, and at least to limit it. And all the physical and psychological pain and agony, often long enduring, that this human trafficking leads in its wake, both for the individual as well as the impact on human trafficking on family and friends. You also have helped us on how we can limit and ultimately stamp out human trafficking. I'm so delighted to see what's being done by the GBI, by our folks there at the Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport, and how they're cooperating so well with other people around in the transportation industry, particularly in the aviation industry. I think everybody gets a better feeling today about what we're confronting here are human traffickers that are often very, very professional. They're skilled at striking up conversations aimed at luring children as well as adults into what amounts as human slavery. So if those of you who have joined us today have enjoyed our program, and you may wish to join us in the future, you can check out on the topics that we are offering, the dates and times for upcoming programs on our website at www.atlantacir.org. And again, a very, very big thanks to Brenda Moran, Bill Bozarth, Vic Reynolds, Dr. Sharon Cooper, and Tracy Gilbert for making this program possible and as informative as could possibly have been. It has been our great pleasure to have you all join us today. We wish you the very best in the future. And for all of those who have joined us that weren't on the panel, we also wish you the very best in the future. And for your own safety and the health of others, please follow COVID-19 guidelines, physical distance, and wear a mask as appropriate. Again, thanks for joining us. We wish you good health and great happiness from Atlanta and CIR. Good afternoon.